Oh, hello. Welcome to the 2013 Hundie Challenge. Today we're going to be discussing March of the Penguins by Bellowing Saul. Dee-doo-dee-doo-doo, dee-doo-dee-doo-dee-doo-dee-doo-doo, dee-doo-dee-doo-doo, dee-doo-dee-doo-dee-doo-dee-doo-doo. So, the famous Saul Bellow. I've never read anything by him. That's the case with a lot of these authors, the vast majority of them. The Adventures of Augie March was, of the three novels in this collection, and the only one I read, by far the longest. And it was also by far the hardest read I've had so far in this challenge, with the exception of Finnegan's Wake, which we won't really compare to normal novels with stories and characters. But no, Augie March was a hard-ass read, and I don't know if it was just the way that they packed too many words onto a page, but it was over 600 pages, and it felt like 1,200. Which is not to say that it was not a romp, a rollicking, read at times. It's what's called a picaresque. I had to look this up. But what it is basically it's the story of a lower class person who just kind of makes his way in the world but never quite crosses the line into being an outright villain or criminal. And Augie March certainly does come real close to the line a couple of times. But mostly he just doesn't know what he wants to do with his life. So of these 600 pages and, 30-odd years of his life, whatever they were, he must have had a dozen jobs, if not more, that I can think of off the top of my head. About the first 100 pages, I had a wry, and again, I know this is all, novels are counted by words, and this is all, when I'm talking about pages, I'm talking about just this copy that I have, but take it how you will. The first portion of the book reminded me of A Friend of the Family by Dostoevsky, because there's his grandmother. He calls her Grandma, but they call her Grandma Lauch because she's not actually their relative. She's actually just a boarder that they took to calling Grandma because she was such a domineering personality, which reminded me of Foma Fomich. You just have this person show up in your life and be like, well, I'm in charge now. So that was really funny for the first 100 pages or so. But it also got into kind of tragic area because not really the grandma, but the person who called herself Grandma wanted to have Augie's brother committed, who was, again, similar to The Sound and the Fury. Augie's brother, George, he's never called anything specific that we would say today, some kind of mental retardation or some kind of intellectual handicap. They never call him that, but it's whatever their terminology of the time for that was, an idiot or an imbecile. So Grandma decides that George, which is Augie's brother, has to be committed, which is a very family decision for someone who's no relative to you at all to make. But after she does that, it kind of breaks her hold on them, and they get her back, in a sense, because they then send her to the old folks' home. And there's a point where Augie says that he had been in the hospital, and his mother was also sent to a home for the blind as she progressively got blinder. And there's a point where Augie says, this is all in the first person, that his brother was the only one in his family who never ended up in an institution, which is sad. The other thing that, again, I can't really go into every one of these adventures, or I guess, I don't like this term, but it seems appropriate, the misadventures that he has, because he never seems to get anything right. He always makes his fortune and then loses his fortune, or something that he thought he was going to make his fortune on. It just didn't pan out. But he repeatedly gets into trouble because of the perception that he's sleeping with a girl that he shouldn't be sleeping with. Either he was engaged and they thought he was sleeping with someone else, or he went off to Mexico to raise this eagle with this really strange woman that had held a torch for him all her life, and then he left her supposedly to take a friend to Mexico City. This keeps happening. This is like a recurring thing for Augie, which makes you start to think, unreliable narrator, maybe he really was sleeping with these women and he's not entirely telling you the truth, but he proclaims his innocence the whole time. That being said, what I wanted to say is, one of the things that I think about as I'm going through this challenge and reading all these books is why I never read them before. Most of the classics on this list that I had read were in school. So my thoughts are often in reading this, why was this not on my school curriculum? And the answer for the vast majority of the 10 or 11 that I've read so far is that it features the N-word prominently. Even a Farewell to Arms featured the N-word one time, which surprised me. But that certainly explained to me why that book, which otherwise might appear in something I read in college or high school, would not have. Now, in Augie March, it's much less to do with race relations. There's nothing... Well, maybe there's a little bit of racial problems because he is a Jew living in Chicago. But it's more like he runs into the problems. But it's not like a big overarching theme. Aside from being mentioned in the beginning, I don't think the fact that he's a Jew haunts him. Or really, like, people don't dislike him because of that throughout the bulk of the book. He just mentions that he was beat up as a kid now and then. But all that being said, we read Night by Elie Wiesel. We read some Jewish stories, Jewish studies stories in school too. So I don't know that would necessarily keep Saul Bellow out of the classroom. But I think I got about 200 or 300 pages into this book when there was a very, very explicit description of abortion in the 1930s or so, when one of Augie's friends, who he protests to the ends of the earth that he was not sleeping with, decides to go get an abortion from what we today would call a back alley hanger abortion. And just in gruesome detail, she gets a shot that doesn't work. She goes back to the abortionist, and it was really mortifying. And so as I was reading this book, and I was like, this is there's not too much racial, undertones, or he's kind of a jerk, but he's not really a criminal. I wonder why this wasn't in my high school. And then I got to the lengthy portion about how women got abortions in the 30s, and I realized, wow, maybe that's why The Adventures of Augie March didn't make it into my high school. Overall, despite being a hard read, it was enjoyable, except it really sagged in the middle when he went to Mexico. I much more enjoyed the parts when he was in Chicago, growing up with all these rough and weird characters. That was the best part of the book, was the beginning. Then when he goes to Mexico, it's just this long, boring drag, dealing with this one woman and the American expatriates in Mexico. That was where the book kind of just became a slog for me. But the first part was pretty good. So that's The Adventures of Augie March. Next time we will be looking at Death Comes to the Archbishop by Willa Cather. Thanks for tuning in.